There's a ton of noise out there. So, how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We're here today with Robbie Abed. He's an author, ghostwriter, and Inc. magazine contributor. Robbie, how are you doing today, man?
Doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for coming on the show. I am really excited to have you.
I'm excited too. I know I've been listening to your show quite a bit, and I'm just happy to be on and share my wisdom.
All right. Well, hey, we are going to jump into a topic that you have a lot of experience in. As we mentioned in the intro, you do a lot of writing in various formats so that people have a frame of reference and know kind of what you're up to, why you're talking about B2B content writing and ways that we can do it more effectively. I'd love for you to take a second and just introduce yourself and let the audience know what you are up to these days.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. About me, like I said, I'm a writer, a ghostwriter, and a writer for Inc. magazine. And my background used to be IT consulting. I did IT consulting for a long time, and I kind of got fed up with the consulting world and dealing with the IT world. And so I became an entrepreneur, and that's where I learned how to write. I wrote a few books. One of the first books called "Fire Me, I Beg You," which is how many people know who I am. And I just teach people how to take risks with their career. And I've sort of taken my writing and marketing career, and now I do it on my own. And I ghostwrite for busy executives that have a lot of things to say, they just don't have enough time to say it. So I kind of own that niche for the IT executives. And so, I've been doing that for the past year or so, and it's been worked out really well for me.
I love it. And when you were doing the IT consulting yourself, were you primarily doing marketing in that niche?
No, I absolutely not. I was working for Accenture and Deloitte, and I was implementing IT as a tech lead.
Okay.
And so I'd work at like companies like Microsoft or Allstate or Walmart as a tech lead. And so that had absolutely nothing to do with marketing.
Tech lead turned marketer turned writer. I love it, man. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, you've got some things to share here that I think our audience is going to get a ton of value out of. So I would love to jump right in, Robbie. And one of these first strategies that you talked about as we were coming up with a topic for this interview in writing more engaging content for B2B brands, the first recommendation you tend to make with folks is find ways to share personal stories. Tell us a little bit about where that fits.
Yeah. So I think as you know, blogging itself used to be a tactic that used to work really well 10 years ago. And what's happened is so much content has come out there that it's really watered down a lot of it. So it's really hard for content to stand out. And so what's worked really well for me and as well as my clients is we focus on personal stories. And, example, one of the posts I did for one of my clients, he talked about a personal story about how one of his employees did something extraordinary and did something that wasn't asked of him, but ended up generating the company millions of dollars of revenue because this person took a risk. But it was a very personal story about something that happened to them or within their company, and people really resonated with it. And so the content, if you take your content and say, here's what's happened to me and here's what I've learned, as opposed to, here's 3 things you can learn from that, it makes it a lot more real, and people are just looking for real content. So when I write, I usually start with a story and I expand from there. And that's worked out really well for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've seen some of the people that I follow on LinkedIn really use this strategy very well. I think of Dale Dupree is someone from a sales perspective I've been following a lot lately. And you look at his posts that start with a story and then there's a lesson, but it starts with the story to get you engaged. From your perspective, Robbie, what do you think is standing in the way of a lot of B2B brands from using these personal stories in their content?
That's a really interesting question. I think that the first thing that people, especially when it comes to B2B brands, is that they don't know who the content is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so they tend to try to talk like from the brand's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And there really is no tone of voice. You know what I mean? Like they're talking about like a generic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so generic, the content becomes generic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the angle that I've taken, especially with my ghostwriting, is that I'll take a B2B company as a client and say, I will interview individuals within that company and write content on the behalf of an individual within the company. So the content comes from them and their voice as a representative of the company, as opposed to like writing on the behalf of the brand. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like one level away, and that's when content doesn't become interesting. And so that's the number one thing, is especially writing blog posts. Either they hire a PR firm because they just don't have time to write, and it usually just sucks so bad. The content just comes out so bad because they're not really in it. It's not from them, So that's why it's just not effective. And so that's where the niche that I've owned through this ghostwriting is writing on behalf of individuals. And the funny thing is about ghostwriting is that I'm still writing what they're saying. You know what I mean? I'm not like putting words in their mouth. I'm just literally putting the words that they say on paper.
So do you
that's different.
Yeah. So do you do, I'm assuming you do interviews with them to kind of understand their voice and be able to write in their tone and things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So some people are, some people speak in like absolutes, you know what I mean? Or some people like play middle of the road. It really just depends on where they are in their career or the company they're representing. And so I started asking those questions about, things that they say, how outlandish some people are. I mean, do you speak like Donald Trump, or do you speak like, or like Barack Obama, or, you know what I mean? Like where are you, and what is your tolerance for saying something that people are going to disagree with? So I love the people that are saying, hey, I mean it when I say it. Go ahead and put it on paper. You know what I mean? When I swear, please swear. You know what I mean? So those are my favorites, and those are the ones that are really deep down the most interesting in the end. So it has to come from a single person.
Yeah. And you're giving a chance for that personality to shine through, which people can actually connect with. I love that. The next thing you wanted to talk about was, how people can get away from these listicles, these, 3 reasons why you should do X, or the top 5 hacks to improve your productivity, and some ways that they can write more effectively. So we've talked about personal stories. We've talked about, personal voice. What are some of the other ways that people can avoid putting out, this bland content or these clickbaity little listicles, things like that?
Yeah. I think that the number one rule is that if you wouldn't read what you wrote, don't write it. That's basically it. Because if you won't read it, then other people won't. And so, like I said, back in the day, if you're writing something, you should have like SEO value or some sort of value to it. Now there's like no value. You know what I mean? Like, and if anything, it's doing damage for you, because if you want to write good content, especially for SEO, it's got to be really expensive. And so what I tell people to get away from the listicles is usually focus on like one point and expand around it. And again, it usually revolves around like a story or something else like that. But and when it comes to like, 3 things you can learn from this, like it just smells like someone who's just wants to write for the sake of writing. You know what I mean? And sometimes like, especially if you're on the quote or things like that, I can see why that would happen. But, I'm trying to think like, the best way to get away from it is don't start with it. Start with like a central point and expand. And I usually, when I write, I start like in the middle of the story, and I expand from it. And one thing to do is like to make a point and stick with it. So like you say is, I think Apple is going to be the first $1 trillion company. Here's why. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's sort of the thing is like make a point, and like stand by it.
Yeah.
I think that's, and you have a lot of things to say, then that becomes really easy.
Yeah. There's nothing more frustrating than reading an article, even if it's, a short, 500 word post or something like that, and realizing that it's just reiterated some vague generalities. And so I think you make a really good point in start with something very specific that you have to say. Start mid story, start with something very granular. And that's something I've learned too, is the more granular that you can get, the more valuable it is. We think that, there's only going to be a narrow niche that's going to be concerned about this, but better to hit that niche with something super valuable that they can walk away from than these bland generalities that everybody's putting out there, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that's the thing. And so again, it comes down to your filter of would I read this, or would someone else find this interesting?
Yeah.
And if not, just don't publish it. I mean, I think some people go a little, too overboard with just writing the personal stories, because after a while it's very clear you're recycling stories, and you're like trying to make a point out of something clearly unrelated. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Don't stretch.
People are like, here's 3 things you can learn from Michael Jordan winning 6 championships, and it's like, okay, well,
right.
Really, please tell me, because I mean that's what's out there. So I think when Jason Fried said the best content strategy is to write when you have something to say, and I stand by that. If you write when you have something to say and you stay away from like a content calendar, I think content, like having a cadence of content is great, but a content calendar essentially forces bad content.
That's really interesting. I always heard, write what you know, and then, couple that with what you're saying here, Robbie, write when you have something to say. If you stick to those two things, you'll probably be all right.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
The third thing you wanted to cover was, blogs have become so ubiquitous. It's not 10 years ago where you can just put out masses of content and expect to generate traffic with that. And so you have some specific ideas and this thought of, start assuming that no one reads your blog. Tell us about that strategy and how you can use a blog effectively these days.
Well, I think if you start with that strategy of assume nobody's going to read your blog, it makes things a lot easier, because it's like people get really scared of, like, what if people don't like it? And the real answer is don't worry, because they're not going to read it. So you don't want to worry too much about it. You know what I mean? Like, just don't freak out about it. And so what's worked really well, and this is not a novel idea, and I'm sure plenty of your guests have said the same thing. It's either you write one definitive piece of content or you don't write it, especially when it comes to your blog. It's like for my website, like firemeibegyou.com, which is about my career advancement in business. I write an article about, resignation letter. I'm just doing one at a time, and I'm trying to make it as best as possible. And that generates 67% of my traffic of people searching resignation letter templates, resignation letter examples. I'm not competing with some other bigger, sites out there, but it really comes down to, is this the definitive piece of content that's going to answer my question, answer a certain question? Then if it's not, then don't write it. Stay away from most of it.
Again, it comes back to that point of getting super granular, right? Like, you're not putting a post on just how to write well. You're getting into, okay, in in the resignation letter. In this point, in this journey, someone's going to be searching for this very specifically. And so if you can put out a super valuable piece of content on that exact scenario, then one, it's easier for that to actually get found. And two, it's easier to make that valuable for people, in those areas.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing you talked about a little bit here when we were chatting offline, Robbie, was, when you're assuming no one reads it, you want to create other ways to drive traffic to that blog when you do have that one core piece of content. What are some of the strategies that you see that, where you can kind of compete with that noise and get people back to those pieces of content? What's working for you specifically right now?
Sure. Yeah, what works really well is, and I do this a lot for my clients too as well, is one stable piece of content, one piece of content that's really good. And then I'll use LinkedIn, like the status updates, to kind of supplement that. So I'll write one, we'll publish it on, like you say, first of the month. And then we'll write like 6 or 7 status updates that month that essentially support the case you made in that blog post. And so using that LinkedIn and using LinkedIn, like the status updates, has been really effective. And that's the best way for people to read your content. So I use LinkedIn heavily for that. My clients do, and they see engagement. And this is actually a platform where people do read it because they almost have no choice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no click. It's there. It's there for now. So that's sort of the situation.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a really good point. When you repurpose that, you are finding ways to support it, but you're sharing value in those nuggets on LinkedIn. So even if they don't click through, they're associating you with that valuable content. We do that a lot with these podcasts. We turn them into LinkedIn status updates, which, as you said, have some value. One, LinkedIn prefers those status updates to long form articles. They just get more reach. And two, people can read them more quickly. They hit read more. They don't have to click through, change a page. As they're scrolling, they can get some value. So we're big believers in that. Just don't tease the content. Share something of value and then get people through, because even if they only see your continual drips on LinkedIn, then they're associating that value with you, even if they don't click through. Back to your point of, no one's reading your blog. You're, being a little extreme in that statement, but it's also true that not everybody's going to click through, right? So take advantage of that space that you're using to promote it.
Yeah, exactly.
Robbie, this has been a great conversation, man. I think you've got some practical takeaways for folks doing content writing in the B2B space, people that have things to share. If people want to stay connected with you, reach out, maybe ask some follow-up questions, anything along those lines, what's the best way for them to go about doing that, man?
Yeah, the best way is you can just reach out to me directly. It's Robbie, Robbie, at firemeibegyou.com. And that's the best way to reach me. Also just add me on LinkedIn. And that's where I'm most active. And also you can sign up for, if you're looking to change jobs or hate your career, which is about 99% of you, go to firemeibegyou.com to learn more.
Check out that resignation letter blog post, right?
Yeah, check out the resignation letter blog post, exactly. Awesome. And link to it. That'd be the best. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Well, Robbie, this has been great. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
All right. Thank you very much.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.